Greetings, brothers and sisters. Hello and welcome back to Witches of the Moon. Welcome to Season 8. I'm Eva Maria, for those of you who are not so familiar with me. For those of you who are familiar with me, for those of you who are familiar with Witches of the Moon, I would like to say that I am seriously sorry for my disappearance toward I think somewhere either in the midpoint toward maybe the end point of season 7 is probably closer to the midpoint onward that I sort of disappeared. I want to say I'm sorry for that. And the reason for that, there are actually a few reasons. The main reason being that my life has been extremely hectic and crazy as of late. Starting at the end of 2016, things just began to get nuts, and I haven't fully recovered, so, and then also, I've had some technical difficulty. You may notice that the quality of my recording is different than it's been in the past, and that's because my MacBook Pro has, for lack of a better way of putting it, shit the bed. So that needs repair. I don't quite have the time or the money at the moment to focus on that. I'd rather instead put my money toward other priorities that are more important and kind of leave that toward the back burner. I invested in a PC, the best I could get my hands on, the best I could afford, in order to keep doing the things I need to do here on YouTube, but also in order to go forward pursuing a bachelor's degree in business administration online, which is something I'm also doing. So, yeah, I've just had a lot on my plate, and that's why I haven't fulfilled my obligation, and I apologize for that. One thing I would like to say is that for the remaining topics of Season 7 that I didn't cover, I've been thinking about, I don't want to make any promises, but I've been thinking about covering those topics separately on my channel at some later point on my personal YouTube channel. Because I do feel that there are probably some of you who would have liked to have heard me chime in on those topics, and while I could record videos as I was thinking about doing for a time, on those topics and posting them here, I think it'll kind of mess up the flow of things, so I think I'm going to speak on those topics at a later time on my own channel. With that said, all that out of the way, my apologies, all of that, my explanations, I think it's time to move forward into the topic that we are opening this first week with. We're going to talk about influential, famous witches and or magical practitioners, people who made history, people that held a lot of weight, in the pagan community at large, in the alternative faith community, I should say. They did things that really just were very extremely needed and important, I feel. And so the practitioner I chose to speak on Sybil Leek. And I can't exactly say why I was drawn to her, but there's something about her that I do admire. I don't know if it's that she seems to have, or seemed, I should say, she's passed away. I don't know if it's because she seemed to have a sort of almost spunk about her, or what it was. Like, by spunk, I mean like almost like attitude and like, like there was something about her that she didn't shy away from being in the limelight or being in front of people. Like, she wasn't afraid to be herself, and I think that's very admirable. I try also to be my authentic self as much as possible, and I encourage others to always be their most authentic self and to not, to make no apologies for who you are, because I think that's extremely important in the world. The world needs authentic, genuine people. It really does, I feel. So that's probably part of the reason why I was drawn to her. But otherwise, I really don't know. I was somehow just drawn to choose her as my influential magical practitioner to speak on. So with that said, I also want to let you know that I do have notes because there's a lot of material. This is probably not going to be a super long video, but there's a lot of material I want to mention. I don't want to forget any points that I want to make. I will be citing sources in the description of this video for where I got my information, so that if anyone's like, oh, well, you pulled this or that out of your butt, you can look down at the sources that I cited. You know, take it up with them, because that's where I referenced my information from, to be sure that, you know, I dotted my I's and crossed my T's. Is there anything else I want to say? Yeah, also, there is a lot about Sybil Leek's life that it would be really hard for me to cover her, like, entire autobiography, you know, or not autobiography, that would be if somebody wrote their own biography. It would be hard for me to cover her entire biography, the entire story sort of her life in a condensed video format. It's easier, I think, if those of you who are interested in knowing even more than I'm going to tell you, you know, if you go and visit the links that are my sources, you know, that regard her, you can go and check those out, you know, read the articles there, read the material there, the resources, and you can become even further familiar with who Sybil Leek was and what her role was in the world and how she led her life. You know, I can only give you sort of like a really condensed version. I'm just sort of giving you like the Reader's Digest version of her as a figure, you know, what she did, who she was. And I'm doing this mainly because while some of us may have, you know, read about a lot of influential figures, some of us may be familiar with her, there may be some among us who are newer to alternative faith, or who are newer to paganism, or who are newer perhaps to witchcraft, or what have you, you know, the occult in general, something like that, you know, the sort of realms. And they may not know a lot about historical figures or history in general. They may want to know more. So I did want to provide the main points about her, and then allow for you all, again, to go and you know, look into my sources that I have cited in the description in order to gain more information, in order to sort of fill in the blanks of what I give you. Okay, so Sybil Leek, she was born on February 22nd, 1922, and she passed away on October 26th of 1982. I was 1 year old when she passed away. Not that that matters. Just throwing that in there. It's just interesting because that popped into my head when I was doing my research. What's funny is, though, that while Sybil Leek was born on February 22nd, 1922, her birth year, according to one of my sources, actually according to both of my sources, they alluded to a birth year that was put forward as 1917 on her funeral card. I'm not exactly sure why that was done, why that claim was made, but officially her birth date was her birth year date was 1922. So, Sybil Leek was a hereditary witch whose family ties to the occult supposedly could be traced back to 1134 AD. I say supposedly because I have not seen any, like, documentation. I cannot verify that this is indeed true. But this is something that's been said. Sybil Leek, according to my sources, you know, she, and according to other sources, books that I've read and so on and so forth, you know, she has made the claim in her lifetime that her family had been involved in witchcraft for a very long time. The sources that I cited, they say that the ties that her family had to witchcraft and the occult and so on and so forth, the you know, the metaphysical and all that kind of stuff, you know, the supernatural, that they all kind of, as far back as they could trace it, was 1134 AD. She identified herself also as a druid of the New Forest in England. She was a high priestess, an astrologer, a psychic, an occult lecturer, a journalist, a columnist, a television writer, and an author of over 60 books. Most of her books were on witchcraft, but some of them were on other topics, such as, paranormal phenomena, astrology, psychic phenomenon, etc. Sybil Leek was often referenced as Britain's best-known witch until she came to the United States of America in 1964. Basically, what made her very influential was that she was a public figure representing the pagan community and witchcraft in its formative years, when it was just coming out of the shadows. At that particular time in history, around the early 1960s, magical practitioners as a whole, they seemed to lack a strong public voice. They were largely misunderstood by the masses, by the general public. So it was very important, I think, for someone to demystify, represent, educate people at large on, what witchcraft was all about, what paganism was all about, what psychic phenomenon, paranormal stuff, astrology, etc., what all this kind of stuff was really about. Because you have to understand that what people don't understand, they tend to fear. Sybil Leek helped the general public to understand the pagan community and witches, as a whole, in particular, as best as she was able. Now, she wasn't the only outspoken witch at that point in time, however. There were others, such as, for example, Gerald Gardner, Raymond Buckland, Alexan Maxine Sanders, and others. They were fairly well-known figures as well, but Sybil Leek, she did play her part in giving an identity to an unknown community. And her part in giving a face and a voice to witches, pagans, and occultists helped to pave the way to where we are today. People, I think, take for granted, pagans particularly take for granted, witches, us in the alternative faith community. And I like to use that terminology because it really is more inclusive of all the many different paths of magical practice, that there are, spiritual practice, and so on and so forth. Those of us in the alternative faith community, I think we do a lot of times, we may take for granted the fact that you didn't always have an occult shop up the street, never mind one online, where you could buy supplies and things that, you could easily, utilize, or, novelties or luxuries or indulgences that could contribute to your way of life, your belief system, etc. We didn't have that convenience once. We didn't have the ability to speak openly. While there still is some persecution, it is nowhere near the persecution and the judgment that magical practitioners, witches, etc., occultists faced earlier on in history. We really do have a lot more freedom. We really are accepted to a greater degree, not completely, but to a greater degree, due to the influence of these figures, for example, Sybil Leek, who, particularly in America, this is also elsewhere as well, but particularly in America, they had a profound influence here, just as witchcraft and the occult were sort of rising up out of the darkness of secrecy. they really paved the way for us to be able to be here on YouTube speaking about this openly without fear, you know. They really paved the way for us to have a lot of the conveniences that we have today. They really did, they really made the world a different and better, I feel, place. So, I knew this video was going to be kind of short, and it is. But I think in the greater scheme of things, it is. But I hope that I've given you at least a very foundational understanding of who Sybil Leek was, the very basics, very much to the point. But again, I do encourage you go and look at the sources I cite in the description of this video to learn more about Sybil Leek and her life. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that for those of you who are newer to your practice, that this really, that it contributes to your foundational knowledge upon which you will build as you continue on in your studies and practice. Why is history important? Why is knowing things like this important? Well, it's important because we can learn a lot from these people. You know, how are you supposed to, for example, become acquainted with the works of Sybil Leek? She's written over 60 books if you don't even know who she is. So getting acquainted with who she was and what the significance of her role in our community is important. And also it gives credibility to the work that she created. You know, it's so easy to pick up a book and you see an author's name on the cover, but if you know nothing about the author, I mean, how do you even know what sort of person this was? You know, she had a lot of credibility because, again, you know, she did a lot of serious and hard work. You know, she was, as I said before, you know, this is a high priestess. This is a druid of the New Forest, you know, a lecturer, a journalist, a columnist, a television writer. You know, like she really was like in it to win it. You know, she really gave her all to this aspect of her life, to her passion to educate people and to bring an understanding to the world of, which I said in saying education, but you know what I mean? Like, she really was passionate about her craft. She was passionate about her religion, about her beliefs, about all of that, all her spirituality, you know, the call of her soul, basically, for lack of a better way of putting it. It was very important to her, so much so that she devoted her life to these very, you know, to this career of credible and serious service, in a sense, in terms of intellectual contributions to the world. And I say intellectual contributions because, you know, again, she was a journalist, you know, being a high priestess and a druid, you know, a teacher, you know, a waymaker, sort of, you know, being a television writer and being a columnist and all that. Like, she was really very much about education, education, education. So, anyhow, I hope that I have given you an understanding of, you know, who this woman was. You know, when you pick up a book, if you pick up a book, and I do recommend her books, I've read some of them and I feel that they're very solid. At least I hope that I have given you the ability, when you see her name in print and you're reading something she's written, to have an idea of, like, who the heck this lady was, and maybe that will lend some sort of, as I said before, credibility to what she has written. You know, this is not just some person who just showed up on the scene yesterday and they're just like writing whatever. You know, this is a woman who her whole life was devoted to this, and she was quite serious about it, and she didn't just pull things out of her butt, you know. From, you know, from what I gather, from what I understand, from all the sources that I have referred to, she was definitely a smart cookie, and definitely she had some chutzpah, and she was very, very influential and very important to all of us. So, With that, I'm going to wish you all blessed be and ashe. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to contribute, add, whatever, please, I welcome you to put those in the comments below. And until next week, until our next exchange, you all stay awesome. Check out everybody else's videos this week. Check out all the different influential magical practitioners that they will be talking about. And yeah, bye-bye for now.